for people who are just coming in and for the sake of the video being recorded, this is a discussion that we are doing internally at iSPIRT, and for folks who are from the ecosystem who are participating in the conversation. The idea is more towards, I think there is a larger discussion and debate that is going on around net neutrality. We wanted to focus the discussion a little bit on what's happening with zero rating and the ecosystem that's evolving around it, and the policy and the discussion that need to be happening around that. Partly because we want to understand what are some of the impact and some of the larger occurrences that will actually happen because of that. So we've invited Kunal. Kunal, I know your previous avatar, but how do I introduce yourself? Do you want to basically do a quick intro?
Sure. Thank you, Vijay, and thank you, iSPIRT, for organizing this. Just a quick background about myself. I've had the opportunity and privilege of working inside government at the Telecom Regulatory Authority. I've also worked as a consultant to operators and technology providers, and I've also been a long-standing board member of 197 Paytm and investor and advisor in the app ecosystem, working with a lot of different startups across the board. So I've tried to cover all the bases.
Thanks, Kunal. Kiran? We have Kiran from HasGeek.
Hey guys. So I'm one of the volunteers who built the Save the Internet website and orchestrated a campaign.
Excellent.
And just to make my stance fairly blunt, I think zero rating is a violation of network neutrality, and there is no way to look around it.
Okay. Arvind? Arvind, I can't seem to hear you.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Yeah.
So I am been an entrepreneur all my life, and I always say once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur. And the last role that I did was I am the head of technology for the Bharatiya Janata Party. So that's what I do right now, also apart from my entrepreneurial ventures.
Okay. So, Kunal, do we want to start off with you? I think we'll give each one about 5 to 8 minutes to talk a bit about set the context from the perspective of somebody who's probably logging in, who's probably a startup entrepreneur, right? So a lot of the people really don't get all sides of the story. So everybody keeps saying that there's a larger picture that we're kind of missing. So maybe you can set a context around that, give the brief around.
Thanks, Vijay, for putting me in the hot seat by making me go first. But I don't want to take up too much of the time, because I think it's better that we all have an interactive discussion. But there's a couple of different aspects that one needs to look at when looking at net neutrality. One is related to the specific quality of service, the specific bandwidth, and the delivery. And the other is related to commercial models around pricing and how those commercial models are to be offered. And I think we should look at these two things somewhat independently and looking at how we go about actually modeling this. So the first piece is basically around how do we look at the overall bandwidth, what's been referred to as bandwidth shaping or delivery of services, delivery of bandwidth. And I think that by and large, all of the players in the ecosystem, which means even the carriers and the telcos, have looked at what is the ramification of basically trying to not treat every bit equally. And I think overall, one has to treat every bit, regardless of what its end use is, regardless of what its purpose is, regardless of how it's going to actually be delivered. It has to be treated equally and in an unshaped fashion. Now, the contra-argument to this that a lot of the infrastructure providers and the technology players are basically presenting is that we live in a bandwidth-constrained country today, i.e. in a spectrum-constrained or an infrastructure-constrained country. And therefore, they need to be able to have the ability to shape bandwidth or to optimize quality of service, for example. For example, if there is a video streaming call, there's this Google Hangout that's taking place, there's a voice over IP call, etc., etc. Operators believe that they should not be so straitjacketed that they're not able to deliver a superior service based on this type of application delivery. And I think that's where potentially the slippery slope of technology regulation or bandwidth shaping potentially starts. So while it is true that operators need to have the ability to manage their network in an optimal basis, and this is something that the U.S. FCC has also looked at, and other other regulators around the world have also looked at. While it's true that operators need some flexibility and ability to optimally manage a network, but you can't allow for a slippery slope to take place where suddenly today restrictions start being put in place, either positively or negatively, where certain applications are favored over others, and then likewise the opposite of that, where certain applications are basically pushed down vis-a-vis others. Now, traffic shaping, bandwidth shaping has always taken place in networks in the past. Voice traffic versus data traffic, for example. When you have in-roamers, roaming calls, things like that. Telcos have tried to manage with the constrained bandwidth that they have in place, not only in India, but in the rest of the world. You also have different types of customers that are present. Whether we like it or not, basically, different platinum customers have existed in telco networks where better quality of service for voice calls has been delivered to them, and I think that is, in some cases there is a breach of neutrality when it comes to that, but I don't think that anybody is telling the telcos that they shouldn't optimally manage their network. Where we come out on a traffic shaping or a bandwidth shaping argument is, yes, manage your network so that efficiency is delivered, but I don't think anyone wants to allow telcos to go down the path of suddenly deciding that they would like to prioritize certain types of streams, applications, or end destinations over others. And I think there was potentially an interpretation around what was being offered by some of the telcos, thinking that they would be, because of commercial arrangements, they would be prioritizing certain sites or destinations or traffic over others. And I believe that the intent potentially wasn't that. There's been some clarifications, though not necessarily completely straightforward, but I think there's by and large agreement that that should not take place. And to give you a case point of that, what I mean by the slippery slope is, so a telco, say an Airtel, came out with a plan that said we're going to charge higher for Skype voice or Viber voice or things like that. The slippery slope basically starts where, does that extend to this Google Hangout, for example? Does that extend to the ICICI Bank app, where you're doing a video call with a branch manager or your branch representative for banking purposes? Does that extend to a telemedicine call, for example, if you're sitting in a remote location? It doesn't even have to be a village. If I'm just sitting at home and I want to have a telecall through an application with my doctor, then does that extend to that? And does it extend to some of the e-governance initiatives as well that are taking place? So if we're doing a Panchayat conference through a Skype or a Google Hangout, or you're doing it over a VoIP application, suddenly does that mean that if you're doing it over a telco's wireless network, that the charging for that is also going to be basically discriminated against? And I think that's what, representing sort of on the application side and on the user side, that is something that we absolutely want to prevent. Now, shifting gears to the second piece, which is the commercial model and the charging and the capabilities. And we already got the viewpoint in the beginning that Kiran represented, that he's absolutely against any sort of zero rating free charging, and that's absolutely acceptable. That's absolutely fine. I think basically what the intent of telecom operators was in potentially trying to do this, and this is where some of the potential justification on their side, just so that we present both sides of the argument, was they want to enable the ability for people who have lower affordability to potentially be able to come on board and experience the internet. The opposite side of that argument was basically that this is a limited internet, and who controls who are the websites that get experienced, who controls who are the websites that have access, who are part of this club, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, therefore, doing a unregulated zero rating, or doing a non-level playing field or type of zero rating, where a certain operator basically through an through what's called a intransparent sort of manner gets to decide who is part of this club, who gets zero rated, who doesn't, et cetera, is absolutely not in favor of the development of the internet, is absolutely not in favor of consumer welfare, is absolutely not in favor of new customers discovering new applications and services and technology innovation. And I think we're absolutely all on board with that argument. And I think telcos, though, by and large, are still not completely grasping what that argument means, which is that they believe that they're doing this for the betterment of consumer experience. They believe that they're doing this for further expansion of internet access, internet usage. Whereas where the problem goes is basically back to that slippery slope argument, which I made a couple of minutes ago when it came to bandwidth shaping and when it became to technology and the various mechanisms that operators are using to determine traffic flows. Is where do you draw the line to make sure that this is transparent? In technology, you can clearly say that that a consumer demanding a certain bandwidth, demanding a certain set of bits is being treated equally or is not, by basically looking at the consumer experience and by making sure that quality of service parameters are being met by telcos. But in a commercial model, how do you draw the line and say that a zero rating platform, for example, is transparent or is non-transparent? How is it that a particular app provider or media provider is allowed to join that platform or is not allowed to join that platform? And how do consumers who are going to experience that platform know that this is happening in a completely transparent way? And again, it's the avoidance of that slippery slope where a lot of people come out saying that zero rating is basically not at all allowed. So I'm going to leave the argument there for now, and then we can always come back to questions. But I'll hand it back over to Vijay.
Okay, I think that's interesting. I've just taken a couple of notes. We're going to come back to a couple of questions after that. I think the concept, the question around zero rating is going to be something that's, I think we need to talk a little bit more about. Kiran, do you want to pitch in? Hello? Yeah. Kiran, I think you're still on mute.
Yeah, I was on mute. So I think the fairly obvious point is that there is pretty much no way to define zero rating in a way that says that here's a good side and it will never be used in a bad way. And therefore,
I want to go a little bit back, right? So I think Kunal raised some very interesting perspectives, and I think from a perspective of a technologist, so what Kunal was essentially saying is that if you go by the idealism of net neutrality being that a packet is treated as a packet, today all of our routers need to be reflashed with custom firmware, right? Because every router in the world today actually has QoS software built in, which does prioritize video and audio.
There is no problem
before it actually.
So let's be clear about this. That reasonable network management is not a network neutrality violation. Network neutrality is specifically to do with who is paying for this data.
Exactly. So I think we all understand that from a technology perspective, we don't have a problem with data packets being prioritized and things like that. But it's a commercial angle which actually comes.
A commercial angle, that's a problem, and this is really where zero rating falls apart. Because commercially, I have no control over who I'm paying for when I zero rate my service. When I do business with my hosting provider, I'm in a direct relationship with my hosting provider. Hosting provider connects me to the internet, and after that, they get out of the way. As a user, when I work with an ISP to get an internet connection, ISP or telco, my relationship is with that telco. They offer me a plan, I accept the plan, and after that, I have the internet. No bars. So in general, both sides of the relationship, whether it is me as someone hosting a server or me as someone accessing the internet, I deal with one entity that offers me a plan, and if I like the plan, I do business with them. With zero rating, on the other hand, I'm paying for the other party's plan, and given that the other party is an exclusive relationship, most people use a single SIM phone. And even if you use dual SIM phone and say that this doesn't apply to me, what will you do next? Are you going to get triple SIM when this stops working for a dual SIM phone? So on the assumption that the last mile is more or less an exclusive relationship, that there is only one way for this person to get to the internet, which is what they use, you can't negotiate the other party's plan. If my user is on Airtel and Airtel says they want a certain rate for this user, I can't negotiate that rate because I'm not the customer. Okay? The only thing I can do is convince my customer to not use Airtel, saying that Airtel is bad for you because they charge me more, which is a ridiculous way to do business with a customer.
Yeah.
So it essentially comes down to the fact that zero rating on a commercial basis cannot possibly be fair because there is no way to make it fair because you're never in a relationship with the party that you're subsidizing.
Okay. So Arvind, what is your take on this? Arvind? Is Arvind still on the call? Okay, Arvind, you're on mute. Yes.
So, you know, let me give a very. I think we'll find very difficult to have people on a panel these days who want to come out openly against net neutrality. I think a lot of us are speaking the same voice, but I want to bring about three things that the and I'm clarifying. I'm putting a disclaimer in, before I start this conversation is that I do not subscribe to any of these views. I'm playing the devil's advocate to Kunal, to Kiran, to all of us here. The argument that the telcos are making, you know, on discovery, on access, and on speed, I think they're pretty much. I think we can resolve that. What is it leading to is, I think, two areas. One is that it's a zero rating is good for digital inclusion. You know, it's the it's the content providers who are paying for new consumers to get on the internet. I said this is not my opinion. I'm just being a devil's advocate, and I'm trying to ask the panel here, how do we counter that argument? What are the comments on that? Because that is one area that the telcos are putting forward and saying, hey, this is zero rating is what will get us more digital inclusion, and this is the plan of Digital India. And that is one area that concerns me, that we
Did Arvind drop off?
Yeah, I think he's dropped off.
No, I think he's back. No, is he back? No.
No, not yet.
I think Nikhil is saying something, except that Nikhil, are you on mute by any chance?
No, I'm not on mute. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes.
Okay, no, I think Urban's dropped off. So.
Rinka is not in chat. Avinash, is it possible that you can reach out to? I see Avinash moving in the backdrop.
Okay, I think Urban will reconnect now.
Yeah.
Nikhil, do you want to take on the response to Arvind?
Yeah, I'll wait for him to return because that's an interesting one. But anyway, just to continue with the same point, right, and not addressing the Digital India issue yet, but basically what this what all of this does is it changes the relationship between the customer and the service provider. And you know, I'm coming to this from an old discussion about mobile VAS, where I remember that in the open house on mobile VAS, the telcos had told the regulator that they are allowing VAS companies to reach the telco audience and their customer base, and that's essentially a sort of a broadcast relationship, and they're trying to take the internet down the same path, trying to convert it into a similar relationship, saying, hey, this is my captive user base and it's my audience, and in order to reach it, you have to pay. So that's a fundamental shift, because currently it's basically about the users using the telcos to access the web. Here it's changing into a broadcast relationship, and that's what we have to perhaps point out. But I guess Urban's back, so I'll go on mute again.
Sorry, Nikhil, I don't know why I got dropped when you came in. I got dropped. So what I was saying was that I will start with my response on zero rating and on toll-free data. In fact, the way we are talking about zero rating and telcos are talking about is Sabka Internet, Sabka Vikas. I guess they're taking our campaign theme and trying to apply it to their thing. Kunal did mention it. If you start, the real purpose Digital India, and one of the is of course to reach out to more people. But as we always said, content is king. If you start differentiating content and telcos become kingmaker, then that telemedicine that he talked about, the new innovative applications, they all get killed. The local languages applications, which don't have money power to come on these platforms, will never be discovered. And because they will never be discovered, I think the real aim, which is a content-driven digital India, will never be achieved. So that's the argument that we are bringing forward, and I'm working on that. The second point about toll-free data, and I'm bringing to this panel that the fact that toll-free data, yes, there's an advantage. The consumer doesn't pay. If it is toll-free data, the way they are packaging it is in the zero-rated manner. That it is all coming to you in a kind of a late menu, and this menu is free to you. So instead of being driven from the merchant from an advertising point of view, it is being driven from the menu point of view, that it is being given to me in a manner that this is the apps that are free to me. I don't know whether the panel would agree or not, but I would say I would be okay if there is toll-free data, and the content providers which are saying that, hey, my data is free, they give it out as a discount to the consumer. In the end, then it really becomes toll-free data if they are interested in that. But to the consumer, everything is transparent, discoverable. There is no limitation. There is no menu being given. But if I use an X application or a Y application, either I am given a discount back on the data that I have used, or secondly, it's like validating a parking. If I go to a shop and some of the shopkeepers, if I shop there, validate my parking and give me my parking money back, or the telcos don't count that data in my usage pack, then the toll-free data can still be achieved, and we can it can be, everybody can be good, feel good about it. So that way it is okay. But I guess the way they are pushing it, that this is the menu that you need to consume for toll-free data, is against the principles of net neutrality. So that is my take on it. I'll be happy to listen to everybody else's view on that.
Okay.
There is one more point, if I may add, with the permission of the chair, that we've always, there are 3 points that people have talked about from net neutrality perspective. One is no discrimination in access, no discrimination in speed, and no discrimination in cost. I would also want to bring about the 4th aspect, is no discrimination in content. This so much does not apply to the telcos only, but applies to all the platform providers. Given that democracies all over the world, our conversations, our media is becoming more and more dependent on digital tools, I think one of the things we need to talk about within net neutrality is that they should not be throttling of content within platforms also. And again, I'm happy to hear other people's comment on that, but we see that as a big risk in throttling information.
Yeah. So, we almost have about 30 minutes to go, right? So, from a moderation perspective, I think we want to set the agenda for the next 30 minutes this way, right? I want to hear a little bit about, there are 2 different operators taking very different takes on zero rating, or violation of what we basically talked about as content discrimination, right? I think Reliance is doing internet.org, which still seems to be a very philanthropic initiative, whereas on the other hand, Airtel is running Airtel Zero, which seems to be commercially optimized, maximized in every way, right? I want to hear your take on that, because I think that fundamentally determines the 2 drastic sides of how this could be discriminated. Do you see one being significantly different compared to the other?
That's a question to all of us, or to
yeah, all of you guys. Yes.
You need to be a little bit more Arnavish. You need to ask which one has to speak.
Okay. So I think each one of you guys are bringing very different viewpoints, right? I think Kunal does understand the pain point of telecom. I think from an operational perspective, he's bringing it, right? I don't think he's citing the telecom operators. I think he brings it from the perspective saying that, hey, this is some of the problems that they have realistically. I think, I know Kiran has.
Vijay. Let's just go one by one. We can start with Arvind, and then you just call out names, and we'll all speak. I think
Sure.
that's
Sounds
the
good.
way of doing this.
Okay. So Arvind, why don't we start with you?
So, if the question was, if there is no commercial angle to philanthropic initiatives like Internet.org versus Airtel Zero, I think we don't. Airtel Zero is a very different ballgame. Of course, it's commercial, so none of us, at least I would not endorse that. In its present shape and form, it is definitely against the principles of net neutrality. Coming to Internet.org, while I think I've seen the media releases from the people behind Internet.org, and they say, of course, it's a philanthropic thing, and there is no commercial angle to it, and anybody can come on the platform, and they have a choice of that platform versus going on a regular data plan. My basic hesitation on that is that there is a limited set of applications there that somebody else is playing a gatekeeper and gives a skewed version of the internet, and that is a concern to us. To the audience that it is being targeted to, and that probably is the advantage of it. The second one is, if it is being targeted primarily to the non-smartphone users, which use it as a menu item to start getting initiated to the internet, that's the philanthropy part of it. They're getting the uninitiated onto the internet. My only concern is they should not get a skewed version of the internet. They should not feel this is internet, and these few applications consist internet, and that is a risk that we carry with a platform like that. So while the philanthropic nature is welcome, and it probably would help in reaching out to an audience which is erstwhile is right now not on the internet, but I think it has a risk of presenting a very skewed version of the internet.
Okay, so I'll add one question to it. Do you ever suspect anybody who's probably a corporate, any of their intentions that they basically have, like whatever the long-term effects are, right? So today Internet.org is basically driven by Facebook, which is a for-profit company by every measure, right? Can we ever suspect that it will be a truly philanthropic measure?
Well, I think that is outside the scope of the net neutrality debate, but there are it could really be, and if it does not limit me to use a few sites, I think it will be very philanthropic in nature. It's like subsidizing, again, making every data toll free, so we'll get X number of people. But you're right. I think there is one has to really. There is. If it is adding consumers to their platform, which in turn is heading to their market capitalization and their advertising revenues, then I think it is not philanthropic in nature. It is an indirect marketing that they do.
Okay, so Kunal, what is your take?
I agree with you that they're two very different approaches. I think Internet.org is only a nonprofit in the .org, and that's why it's a bit misleading, or very misleading. And I agree with Arvind's point that I think the approach that telcos and the intent that telcos have come to market with, saying that we want to do this because we want to expand the market by providing those who cannot afford bandwidth access today to be able to get better or unfettered access to the internet. But it's kind of, if you think about what are the ways to accomplish that, and maybe this is not a good parallel or a good example, but even if you look at the gas cylinder subsidy that's available now in India today, it's now a direct subsidy to your bank account. You're no longer providing it at the point of purchase. Now, you get that subsidy because you're a citizen, you registered, you have an address, you go purchase a gas cylinder, the subsidy is delivered to you in your bank account. It's kind of like a rebate. Maybe it's a little bit like that parking validation, which was mentioned earlier. So So I think that while the intent is very noble, that that there should be a zero, Airtel Zero, or there should be a internet.org or something like that, I don't think that the execution of it has been in the way that we wanted, because it does create that slice of the internet. It does create the fact that a certain set of operators get to decide who it is, and it goes back to Nikhil's point about VAS. I mean, we've all lived through VAS in India. We've seen that. You've seen some very innovative companies come up and die, even though they've had great products that lots of people have loved, because telcos have not given them access, they've not given them a commercial model, et cetera, et cetera. We certainly don't want that to happen to the internet. But I don't think that it's impossible to create a model that does serve the purposes that the government and that the greater good that we're trying to accomplish. I think it just takes a little bit of further thinking through. You can't discuss it in 2-3 minutes on a thing, but I think it's possible to get to that objective, to ensure that all of the objectives are being met. It doesn't mean I'm for Airtel Zero or for internet.org. I just think there's a way to create a model that allows people to get exposure to the internet. Because the one key thing to remember is when people got access to voice technology, cellular voice, people already knew what to do with voice, speak to each other, right? And as rates came down, more and more people did more of it. The difference with the internet is, unless you've used it, unless you've had access to it, or you've had a friend show it to you, you don't really know what it is. You don't really know what to do with it, because it's not natural. It isn't part of something that you already do on a day-to-day basis. Speaking on the phone is something that most people have done, at least in this generation, their entire lives, even if they've not had access to a cell phone, and that's why a mobile phone has grown so quickly. So maybe there's a way to figure out a solution that meets all of these purposes.
So Kiran, I think that is a very interesting perspective that you bring to the table, right? You've seen a slightly previous version of this where people tried to bring internet on their desktops. And organizations like Comat and Endlog and all these guys started taking internet to rural India, right? So we were part of that because I was part of IIT Madras, which was actually running Endlog at the time, which had about 3,000 in rural India. So what's your take on this? Subsidizing internet so that people get online, so that the greater good happens.
Absolutely, go for it. Don't do this by restricting what I access. If you want to subsidize, give me a subsidy. Send me some money to my bank account. There's nothing stopping the government from doing that. That's how they do everything else anyway. So I think that discussion, is outside the scope of the current zero rating discussion. It's an entirely different mechanism. There's existing state mechanisms for addressing that. So I think we should basically not make it easy for the telco to have a foot in the door, because this is where the cut off down their old antics of trying to wall off the internet and charge for everything again.
So Kunal and Arvind, right? I think so. The little bit of a context, right? I think one of the things that actually happened in the previous era, about 10 years ago, when people are basically rolling out PCs into rural India, was that I think the same. I've heard very similar conversations happen where people said, if you subsidize the internet, people will use it, right? But you kind of realize that the internet was all in English, and people in rural India really did not want the internet at all, right? They didn't even know what they were supposed to do. Because I remember having this entire conversation in IIT Madras, where a bunch of professors basically sat around and had this arguments that, hey, if the world gets connected, knowledge will flow, this will happen, that will happen, and all those things. And then, one professor basically said, why don't you connect them and see what happens? And we realized that they didn't know what to do with it, right? The obvious thing that they went after was porn, and then they basically shut it down. And then soon enough, we realized that, really people did not know what to do. We told them that, hey, you could get email from people, but most of the time people came back and said, emails from whom? Because there is nobody to send us emails, right? So considering that there is no services on the mobile web, subsidizing help in any way. So I think that's a question for either Kunal or Arvind.
Yeah. So really quickly, Vijay, one piece I forgot to mention when I spoke earlier is I think there's been some data which has floated around which said that something like order of magnitude of 80% of users of internet.org sites through internet.org were already existing data customers. So that actually further substantiates your point, which is that the initiatives that are there are not actually helping to reach out to new internet users. They're basically just creating, subsidies, or subsidy is the wrong word because subsidy is a very altruistic sort of notion, but they're basically creating a, they're helping people who already are there, and therefore not really solving the overall, say, societal objective of getting people connected online and getting more people connected online. And I also agree with you, Vijay,
Arvind, I think Arvind is saying something. Arvind, I'll just be back in 1 second. Yeah, Kunal, continue.
Yeah, I'll just wrap up. I also agree with you that if you just give people internet, like in the nlog example, and we've seen this happen with many different CSEs and things like that, unless you're shown what to do with it and then slowly brought up to speed with it and things like that, you don't necessarily know what to do with data and internet connectivity. But I think that's not relevant in the net neutrality discussion, in the sense that, end usage, what people do with it, et cetera, can be figured out. I think subsidy models and things like that, or how does one actually implement neutrality so that we have a fair and open system, but we help people get on board. I think, again, that's a much further detailed discussion to take place. But in this context, therefore, what people decide to do with it should be their decision. They should be treated equally, et cetera, and we should not create these artificial modes. And I think, regardless of what what has happened so far, and whatever intent the telcos have, they've not executed properly on that intent, and that data on internet.org basically further proves and substantiates that.
Arvind, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, so I think one of the relevant things that all of us have talked about is local language content, and some of this content is sitting and new content that we wish to create. I think globally, studies have indicated people consume content in the language of their choice. I mean, their mother tongue or language that they're comfortable with. All these platforms actually ignore that aspect, and I think that's a very important point, because that is not going to lead to digital inclusion. I think the big aspect of digital inclusion will be content driven. I did mention that earlier, and unless you have local language content, just giving them an internet connection is going to make them do things that they're not supposed to do, I guess.
Okay. I had a quick point to make.
Go ahead.
If I may, Vijay. So I don't know. I kind of get the feeling we're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist right now, because the growth in usage is pretty good. Are we sacrificing the neutrality of the net, or are we considering sacrificing the neutrality of the web to speed up adoption? Because adoption is increasing. Like IDEA said today that there's about a 70% increase in its mobile internet user base year on year. That's pretty good. We've reached about 230 million internet users in all, is what IDEA said today. And so I'm almost seeing this digital inclusion part of it as a sort of a diversion that's just cropped up because of some other concerns. Because a really interesting thing that was on the Idea Cellular conference call today was that Himanshu Kampania said that they have tested voice over IP on their networks, and they believe that the quality of circuit switched voice is good enough to ensure that it will beat VoIP hands down. And he said that their primary concern is of voice over LTE, and that's a better technology according to them. So I think this is more about the threat of Reliance Jio for all of these operators versus either an agenda of increasing adoption, or even a concern related to what if people start using WhatsApp voice on our own networks, because the networks are clearly not good enough. And I'm trying to write about this because there was significant portions of the call which indicated that there is substantial growth in internet adoption. On the point of adoption of Indic language content, we did a conference last year around the same thing, and there is enough content out there. I don't think that's a challenge. There's both video content and what we're finding is that English language video content doesn't really work in India. It's always regional language video content. Even English speaking people prefer uh, Indian Indian language regional content. So that I don't think is as much of a concern. The concern for them is largely discovery. And what I remember from the conference they were saying was that Google search for them doesn't work for discovery. Most of their traffic is coming via Facebook or it's coming direct. Google is 20% of of traffic for regional language um, sites. So on the point about zero rating or not, so just one of the things that was I mean about the toll-free data, I just wanted to re-emphasize the point that we've been making is that toll-free calling is a support system, toll-free data is the entire business, and so they have to be looked at very, very differently. Happy to discuss the nuances of it, but on the whole, both Internet.org and Airtel Zero are largely about making the platform more popular. And I don't want us to be in a situation as a country where the platform starts controlling or throttling the content. And as you know, Facebook already throttles content on its site. And if it starts throttling, if it becomes the primary access point for the web, and you have to remember that you compulsorily need a Facebook sign-in to use internet.org. If Facebook becomes the primary access point to the web, then I guess all they're going to do is extract a toll from every content publisher, just the way the telcos want to do.
Thanks, Nikhil. So I think we're more or less not too far off from each other. I think that I think the agendas are very much similar on what we really want to do, right? And I think the numbers that Nikhil is talking about, what Kunal had actually shared about what's happening with Internet.org. I think they're all very similar, right? I think the bottom line comes down to there's a lot of experiments trying to happen to figure out how do we grow this space. Nikhil is basically saying the base is already growing, but what else can we do about it and stuff like that, right? One of the issues that actually is very, very clear with all of us basically in agreement is the fact that nobody should basically become the gatekeeper for the internet. And I think that's a very, very dangerous, and I think that's what we need to basically defend right now, right? So the case seems to be that, a million email address, million proposals and submissions went to try. It's gone to MPs now. And I think one of the things that worries me is that some of our representatives in the government are kind of mixing, right? When they basically say at any cost, everybody should have access to the internet. And I think that is neither here nor there. I think it's becoming a very scary state to be in. So what is the next steps that we as people who understand this scenario should be doing to basically take it forward? Arvind, what would you suggest?
Before I comment on that, Nikhil, I have a question. At the current rate, is any of the telcos predicting when will we reach a 500 or a 750 million internet connected market?
I think we can extrapolate that on the basis of quarter-on-quarter growth, but let's face it, we don't have about more than 500 million mobile phone users right now. I mean, most of them are multi-SIM connections. I think it's about 700 or 800 active mobile phone connections, and out of those, I think it's supposed to be about 530, 540 million users. So, what's the rush? We already have about 230 million connections connected to the internet. I can get all the data because I was on both Airtel and Idea calls today, and there is no, I mean, data is driving growth for them. If you want more people connected, I mean, the simple solution is that I think some part of the USO fund should be used to pay for free data, and that can be handed as coupons. That's one approach. The other approach is if Facebook wants to do some kind of philanthropy, they should basically give people coupons to access the web. Why only Facebook? So I don't know if I've answered your question, but I don't. I think it's going to be a few years before we reach 500
I just wanted to get a sense of it. Coming back to the question, Vijay, sorry, if you could just quickly repeat what you wanted us to answer.
Essentially saying now the discussion is essentially moving from folks like us who basically understand what is there to lose, what is the goal that we're driving towards, to a more like policy agenda where it's actually heading towards ministers and people who are actually running the government, right? What do we do from here, right? Because I think there's a lot of political interest which is actually starting to back either sides. What are we supposed to do to ensure that the web is open?
See, there are three things I can see them happening. One is the political support that is coming probably on this issue across all parties, very frankly. Secondly, is what the government is doing. The DOT has set up a committee way back in January, and I think if Nikhil may correct me, there is a preliminary report expected in May, the first half of May. And then there is TRAI, which is an autonomous body, which is doing its own stakeholder consultation. I'm not going to get into who's doing what in this, but I think finally the role of TRAI in this is a recommendation role. They want to make a recommendation based on their experts internally, submissions that have happened. But Kunal has been part of the TRAI, as he said. So he can explain that process better. But the job of TRA is to give a recommendation to the government. The government can take part of the recommendation, no part of the recommendation, and then make its own policy based upon that. And for that, they have a separate committee, which is being with another DOT and the minister. So, but I want to explain there are two different processes. The third process, which is more legislative process, which is happening in the parliament. There has been a few debates already in the parliament, and at the floor of the house, everybody is said that they support. A lot of people have said they support net neutrality. And then the fourth pillar, which is the political pillar, which is, I think, as I said, politically everybody is doing that. So, as policy inputs in this, I think we should, if we have to give inputs, I think we should look at two ways. And some of the things that Nikhil already addressed, but explain why net neutrality is important, and some of the media narrative and the articles that we have written and have been around that. But I think the two places where the argument is sticking is it's a free market, and people have a right to choose. Companies have a right to choose how do they monetize on the investment they have made. And secondly, on the whole issue of this toll-free data. So Nikhil and we all believe in that. There are different ways of doing that, but those are the two things that we have to create a public, more awareness on that. I think that's where things that this is part of the digital inclusion. This is going to achieve a higher digitally connected India. That story is sticking, and my concern is, we need to be able to bring out counter arguments in a manner that while okay, the intention is good, there's other ways of implementing it which maintains net neutrality.
Kunal, do you want to pitch in your 2 cents?
Yeah, I agree with what Arvind has said, that I think the process starts now. Nikhil, Kiran, the others who have run the Save the Internet campaign have really educated the public. It's the first time I would say that in all my years being involved in policy making, I've seen such massive public effort behind a government public policy initiative. They've done a fabulous job of getting people motivated behind this, and I think there's no way that one could even think about replicating something like this. Certainly deserves a case study. I think going forward now, actually, this is where the hard part begins in terms of making sure that an educated decision is being made. We want to make sure that the Department of Telecom, the TRAI, the people who are thinking through this decision making, properly aware of all the different facts that are involved, that we don't basically create a situation where they come out with something which is suboptimal, because whatever you come out with, undoing it takes years and years and years. We've seen that in Spectrum. We are still suffering at the hands of Spectrum decisions made back in the late 90s. so we want to give them the time to do it, and I think Nikhil, Kiran, the rest, and I certainly would be happy to make myself available. Need to make sure that the ministers, the decision makers, are properly educated about this on a one-on-one basis, and so that finally the DOT does come out with something that works for all. And if there is an agenda to say that to help accelerate data adoption growth through subsidy or through making access available or things of that sort, I think a separate discussion should be made around that, and that should be decoupled from the net neutrality debate. And vis-a-vis commercial models and openness and things like that, we need to make sure that consumers are the ones at the end of the day who control their destiny, who control their access, and you don't have a few guys who end up being those gatekeepers. Vijay, you're on mute.
Okay, so I was saying that what seemed like people on four different sides of the corner in the boxing ring. I think it fundamentally comes down to the goal is essentially like how do you increase access and how do you basically get more people on the web, right? I think that's really what the basic fundamental comes. I think there are different roads that people are going through, but there are some fundamentals that, as you rightly pointed out, some of the mistakes if you do, it becomes years and years before we actually undo them. And I think that's what worry some of these guys, right? We've all been through the vast era of some of these companies, great companies, which probably did not make it, right? We want to see how we can learn from some of those mistakes and probably do this better next time. And I think I already got a ping from, I think it's probably Rinka, essentially saying that we're almost about wrapping up from time. But one of the things that we want to is that, I will send out a summarized text of what, we talked about. I've taken some notes and stuff like that. But I want to take this discussion forward because as Nikhil will point out that we haven't really done much from iSPIRT side. I think we've been kind of like hanging around. We are doing individually as people, we are doing a lot of things, but as iSPIRT, which is probably much closer to the software product ecosystem, we haven't really taken a hard stance on any of these things. And I think we need to take a little bit more proactive role. And my hope with this whole call was that, it becomes a kicker, in our behinds to basically get us all together.
Okay, I had a few points to make, Vijay, very, very quickly, just as next steps. Firstly, there is a DOT committee, as Arvind mentioned. They are meeting people. We met them yesterday, and they seem to be very, very reasonable, very, very considerate, and they've asked us to give them written submissions on whatever issues we are concerned about. And I think they're open to submissions, especially from the startup ecosystem. And what their concerns are. So, I've asked you guys earlier that, can you prepare a list of the reasons why startups that have left the country so that our policymakers have a better idea about what they face. The other thing is that the TRAI process is not over. In fact, my sense is that the first comment stage is now almost irrelevant, because the way they have structured the comments, everything moves to the counter comment stage. So the entire discussion of the first stage, which used to be comments, then followed by counter comments, they moved it up purely to a counter comment stage by separating operators, associations, and then everyone else. So now everyone else will have to submit separately for the counter comment stage, just to make sure that their voices are heard. So that process still isn't over. Their recommendations are obviously going to be considered by the DOT, and then the DOT will have its own recommendations, and then the government will take a stand. So it's going to be a long drawn process. We can't rest just yet.
Vijay, you're on mute again.
So Kiran, I was basically asking, how do we basically keep in touch with what's happening next? And Nikhil, you can probably add your 2 cents as well.
Okay, so we are going to be, maintaining the blog, blog.savetheinternet.in. There will be updates there constantly based on what's going on.
Okay.
As Nikhil said, there's a long way to go. We are just the next phase. There's 5 to petition for the counter comments phase. There is likely going to be DOT to talk to because they've asked us for comments, and we don't know what's going to happen next. So I'm assuming that this is not going to end in a week. It's going to take us a few months at least.
Just a quick heads up. Arvind says that his laptop battery died, so just to let you know, he's dropped off because of that.
Okay, sounds good. All right, guys. Thank you very much for all of your time. I really appreciate you guys coming on board and doing this. I think this is really, really helpful for the startup ecosystem. I think it's at least a good place for all the guys to get started on what's happening so that they can also get involved. All right. Thanks, Kunal. Really appreciate it. Kiran, thank you very much. And Nikhil, thank you for dropping in.